Welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. If you've listened to our podcast and you want to get in touch and find out a little bit more about what we do or how we can help and support you, reach out via help@trans2performance.com. You can stream and listen to our podcast on all available platforms. So for now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Martin Johnson, and welcome back to another Leader Lounge episode. These Leader Lounge episodes are short 10 to 15 minute episodes where I pick a topic that we focus on here at T2 and I tell you a little bit more about it. Short, snappy, straight to the point, and really good for short commutes, lunch breaks, or even if you're just taking a walk. Today's topic is going to be around your worldview. Now, for anybody who's read my book, I Am Human, Pain and Pleasure, you'll know this is a chapter in the book where I talk about the importance of your worldview, what it is, how it informs everything that you do, whether it's how you think, your behaviours, the decisions that you make, and where does it come from? How does it actually form in the first place? But I guess a good point to start off with would be the definition of a worldview. So here's the definition of worldview, and I'm going to take some notes from my book, Pain and Pleasure. Your worldview has 2 distinct parts. The first is your current mental model of how the world is organised, structured, and works. It's your unique perceived framework for how the world operates. The second element is how much or how little you buy into or agree with that framework. So if you think about that, everybody's got this mental model of how we believe humanity and the world operates. Now, you might be sat there thinking, well, surely everybody has the same view. Surely we all see the world in the same way. Well, we absolutely don't. We absolutely don't. And that's what creates difference. That's what creates divide. What galvanizes other people together. We all have different views of the elements of a worldview. So in order to understand this, we probably need to start looking into the different facets of a worldview and how one person can see it completely different to another. I always say to better understand how you view the world, and Amy's behind the camera and I always am intrigued with she's thinking all the time around how this applies to her whenever we do a topic. But I always say to people, you've got to answer 5 key questions. These are big, deep-seated, meaningful questions. And you might need to take some time to reflect, having listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, and take a note of these 5 questions and maybe answer them at a later time when you've had time to think about it. The first question is, how do I believe the world was created? This is a huge question, right? And it often separates opinion and it causes mass debate. But generally, there are 2 positions on this. There is the religious position or the scientific position. Do you believe the world was created by God and a higher entity, a supreme entity, or do you believe that the world was created by the Big Bang and science and evolution? Genuinely, you'll sit on one of 2 sides of that fence. However, it is entirely possible that you might think it's a combination, which is a podcast in itself, because I've spoken to people who believe in both religion and science, which is a fascinating combination. But the first question you've got to decide on is, how do you believe the world was created? That forms a really important part of your worldview, because as you can imagine, if you believe in science, evolution, and the Big Bang, you'll be more of a humanist, which I'll come to. And if you believe in God, religion, or a higher entity, you'll believe in Pantheism, which I'll come to. But that then sets you on a path in your life. Your value system is set from the start in terms of what you believe to be the reality. The second question you've got to answer in the big five is, how do I believe the world operates? So we can have our answer to how we think it began and how we've evolved to this point. But how do you think the world operates in the here and now? This is your political, societal, and environmental position. So, for example, I might believe that the world operates largely based on capitalism, where we have a system of trade. We have a system of capitalism where if you are successful, you keep the riches of that success. This creates a divide in society. It creates the class system. And very much this is how the world has evolved to date. So if I believe that that's the world that we operate in, and I actually agree that that's quite a good system, and actually the way to get ahead in life is to exploit that system and be successful within it, then my view to that question, my view of the world, is in line with the reality of the way we actually operate. But let's say you acknowledge that that is a system, but you don't believe the way that that should be. You're more of a socialist, or you believe that things should be shared and equal between all people. Then you're not in line with the way the world operates. So the way you answer that question matters to the mindset of how you approach everyday life in modern society. The third big question is, do I agree with or accept the way the world operates? As I just alluded to then, some of us do, some of us don't, but that thrusts you into a process of thinking. It makes you view certain situations in certain ways. This is what polarizes us and splits us at times. So question 3 is important to follow on from question 2. Question 4, what are my motivations and values? What's your moral position? So we all have a value system. We all believe in certain values being upheld. I'll come to the differences between moralism and moral subjectivism in a short while. But your values and motivations shape the way you think. And this is, again, what can separate humans. And the final question of the big five is quite a poignant one, but it's quite a scary one to ask and answer. And I believe it's something you should always ask yourself and answer. Because if you don't and you avoid it through being afraid of the question, it can actually cause challenges for you. But the question is, what happens to us when we die? Now, how you answered question 1 sometimes governs how you answer question 5. So religion versus science. For example, if you're religious, the question of what happens to us when we die might be informed by that first question. So you might say, I believe that when we die, our spirit lives on. I believe in reincarnation. There is something after life. And I think, I speak to a lot of people about this, and I think there are quite a lot of people who like the idea of there being something after this. I think we all do. Whether you believe in religion or not, or science, you would like to believe there is something else. Some of us, however, might say, no, I think we are a mortal being. We are a creature. We evolved. And when we die, we die in mind and body, and our energy is consumed by the earth, and there is no more. Or whatever the answer to that question might be. So you feel entirely mortal, and therefore the years you have on this planet are precious, and you're going to live every single one to the max. There's no right or wrong when it comes to answering these questions, may I add. It's whatever serves you well, but you have to ask yourself the questions in what you believe in, because that is your worldview that governs whilst you're on this planet. Every single thought, feeling, action, everything you do, the decisions you make, the way you perceive situations are all informed from your worldview. So 5 big questions to ask yourself. Now, let's move this a step forward. So when you answer those big 5 questions, you start to pick off the different elements of your worldview. And I don't mind on this podcast sharing mine with you in a short while. But the first question, how do you believe the world began and was created? If you answer the more scientific position, you will end up with an element of your worldview being humanism. Humanism, that means that you believe the world is a natural place based on science and reason. If you maybe went down the line of answering that question that you actually believe in more of a religious perspective, that the world was created by God or a higher entity, it means you have a worldview element called pantheism. Pantheism means the world was created by God or a supreme entity. So you can see, if I'm sat here and I believe in science and I therefore have humanism in my worldview, and another person is sat there and they believe in religion of pantheism, already we're starting off on a trajectory with our worldview completely different. That's going to set us up to think about different things, to view the world in a completely different way, and that will govern the way we navigate it for the rest of our lives. The second combination of worldview elements is optimism versus pessimism. So optimism means the world is my oyster, hope is key, and anything is possible. I meet so many people with this element of worldview, and it serves them well in many senses, but there is such a thing where optimism can catch you out, of course, the overly optimistic person who doesn't spot trouble, danger, or issues. Pessimism generally is a worldview where it guides you in the direction of the world is corrupt, I trust very few people. It's a very pessimistic view of society, of the world, of the way it operates, and that can lead to you being incredibly guarded, skeptical and mistrusting of people, regimes and situations. We talked about this earlier, these other elements of a worldview: moralism versus moral subjectivism. Moralism states it's a belief that you have, and this is so important to understand in modern day society and some of the polarized situations we find ourselves in. Moralism is a belief that the world should be fair and just. We should share the same morals and values. Now, that's a lovely notion. It's a lovely humanistic notion, but to our 7 billion people on the planet to share exactly the same morals and values and all live by them, I think we're asking the impossible. And therefore, people with such strong moralism as a worldview struggle because they cannot deal with people who have opposing values and morals to them. Why is that possible, and why would people have that? Moral subjectivism, however, is a slightly different view of the world when it comes to morals. It's the world is morally indifferent because there's different cultures, different backgrounds, different circumstances. And therefore, morals and values are all subjective. There is no right or wrong. We could debate this all of the time and for a length of time. However, some people have a worldview of moralism, and some people have a worldview that morals are subjective. And therefore, I'm not going to get too caught up in difference because the world is different, cultures are different, and society is different. A few more before we wrap up towards the end of this Leader Lounge episode. Individualism versus collectivism. So if you have a worldview that's largely built on individualism, you will largely view the world in a way where you control your own destiny, and therefore you will be self-reliant and make your own decisions. The power is in your hands. I have this as an element of my worldview. Quite delusional at times. I absolutely believe I can do anything and my entire destiny is in my own hands, but it gives me an enormous personal power and belief that I can overcome any situation. Collectivism. This is slightly different. This is where you have a worldview element that says things should be done together and for the greater good of all. Collectivism means we pull together as a species. Everything we do, we have to consider the impact of all. We have to do together and collective. Now, this is a wonderful worldview element. There's no right or wrong with these. It's just where you sit on which side of the fence. Collectivism has come together and overcome some of the world's greatest ever challenges. It's innovated the human species and society to where we are today. And very much so in many situations, it brings people together, and it's what's beautiful about Homo sapiens. However, Collectivism can't always be applied to every situation in life. And those who have it as a worldview really struggle when they see people applying more individualism than collectivism. Two slightly different elements, but really important to understand which one you are more dominant in and where that both serves you well and where that irritates you and frustrates you and holds you back. And the final couple of elements I'm going to talk about for this podcast is Stoicism versus Entitlism. Stoicism is a worldview element that says, I must be strong and endure the pain and challenge of life. If you ever read anything on the Stoics, it was all about enduring suffering and pain and being resilient and mentally tough in adversity. Some people, again, like myself, have this quite high in their worldview. They make an early call that life is not fair. Life is hard. And therefore, the way to navigate the complexities of it is to be stoic, is to understand that this is part of life and that you've got to be strong and endure the pain and challenges that come along the way. Entitlism, very quickly, is something that I think we're seeing a little bit more in modern day generations due to the comfort crisis and the world that they're growing up in, which often doesn't present as many challenges to endure. Entitlism is a worldview where you also almost have this notion that you deserve to have what you want, deserve pleasure and comfort, reward and happiness most of the time. And again, there is something to be said for not struggling all of the time. And we want to enjoy the comfort and luxuries of life. But as I explain in Pain and Pleasure, that is going to cause us huge mental challenges, which I think we see that we're at the precipice of right now in society. So there's some elements of worldview born out of those 5 big questions that I mentioned at the beginning. There's a test online at trans2performance.com/worldview. So if you're interested in what I'm saying and you're really intrigued to how you would come out and score against these questions and which of the elements of a worldview that you maybe have more strongly in you than the others, then please go to our website and take the test. It'd be fascinating to drop it in the comments and see what you think about your results. When you think about all this, and I'm going to wrap it up now because this topic is quite vast and we could talk about it for quite long. But when you think about it, one of the important reasons to connect with your worldview and understand what it is because it will give you an answer on whether you have more of an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. You might be thinking, what is a locus of control and what's the difference between an internal or external? Let me just give you the definitions. An internal locus of control is when you believe that you are in control of your life and possess the ability to operate within the world based on your decisions and actions, and you therefore attribute your success or failure to your own efforts and abilities. People who have a high internal locus of control are not defeatist about circumstances and challenges and obstacles. Yes, they are absolutely real. They're in the world and we face them every day. But if your worldview elements are largely consisting of what we call internal locus of control, then you will largely believe that you can do something about it always. You will largely believe that you are only one decision or action away from fixing a problem or turning your fortune or overcoming an obstacle. It's so important to understand that not everybody will have a 100% internal locus of control. You'll do the test. You might have some elements where you've got internal and external elements, but by and large, you need a healthy amount of internal locus of control elements in order to overcome challenges, take responsibility and ownership, and navigate the complexities of life. So what's an external locus of control? Well, it's the opposite. An external locus of control is where you believe that you are not, or mostly not, in control of your life and are largely governed by your environment and circumstance. You attribute your success or failure to external factors outside of your control, such as luck or fate. External locus of control if you carry many elements of your worldview where you think, for example, pessimism, moralism, collectivism, if you've got certain elements that are joining together to say, well, there's nothing I can possibly do about this because it's out of my control, generally that leads to a mindset of becoming a victim of your circumstance instead of the master of your destiny. Now, there's elements that I've just read out there where they have real qualities as a worldview. But if they're heavily stacked on the external locus of control side, you will struggle to work through issues, problems, differences, and we're seeing that in the world right now. You will struggle to listen to the other side, and therefore it can become a real issue. So knowing your worldview and the element stack within it gives you a really good indication of whether you're more internal locus of control in your thinking or external. And that is really important to understand, because whatever's holding you back or causing you issues right now, you're only ever a couple of tweaks or reframing the way you think about the world and think about the things within it from improving or overcoming that challenge. And so if you're interested in this topic, and again, worldview is huge, and I could go on and on and on about it, and we haven't even talked about elements of trust and success in our attachment style and all the other things that go into the way we view the world. Just to give you a little inkling into that, you'll be watching this or listening to this. I often find with people there's two types of trust. There is those people who say, I will give you trust from the beginning until you break it. And those are people who say, no, you've got to earn my trust before I will give you it. That's a result of worldview elements in those two people that are causing them to approach trust with others in two completely different ways. And there's so many other facets to this that make up your DNA, the way you operate, the way you interact, and it's all to do with your worldview. So if you've been interested in what I've talked about on this episode, I'll just say it again. I would visit www.trans2performance.com/worldview. You'll be able to take a quick 5-minute questionnaire test, and it'll ask you different questions to those big five, and it will give you a score on how you stack up against some of the elements that I've talked about on this podcast. It's well worth doing, and it's, if nothing else, it gives you a bit of an inkling in how you view the world. And what I want you to reflect on and think about is that serving you well, or where is it serving you well, and where is it potentially holding you back? That's all for now on this Leader Lounge episode. Hopefully it's been interesting. I might come back if we get some engagement on this and you're interested and people engage with it. There's probably a second one we can do on Worldview because there's so much more to discuss. But for now, I will leave you with that. Do the test, think about it. Drop any comments in if you want to ask any questions. And without question, we'll be back shortly with another Leader Lounge episode.
The Leader Lounge with Martin Johnson, brought to you by T2.